Les Bechdel, it is great to be down here in the Grand Canyon with you. You started paddling more than 50 years ago, and we're going to go back to those roots, but here both of us are at fairly advanced ages for paddlers, I would guess. And we're having a great...
Speak for yourself.
Well, okay, that's me. I'll speak for myself. But we're having a great time with some very, very dear friends of both of ours. Many of us have done this before, and I mean, how does that feel to be able to do this now?
Oh, it's a great way. I mean, Bill Baxter, of course, is the trip leader here, and he and Susan and I all did a trip back in 1979, our first canyon trip, and then he manages to pull a permit every 5 years or so, and we have this reunion trip, so here we are.
Exactly. Well, this, my name is Marc Hunt, by the way, and this is Les Bechdel. I got to know Les back in the late 70s, early 80s. We were both in the outfitting business, both raced slalom, although Les was so much better than I was, it's not funny. But the purpose of this interview is for the Southern Appalachian Paddle Sports Museum, which is newly founded in Asheville, which is compiling a series of interviews of people that have done this a while. And so it's an honor for me, Les, to be here with you doing this. So let's go back. Talk about your very first introduction to Whitewater and how it evolved from there.
Okay. I grew up in central Pennsylvania, and for some reason I got infatuated with the idea of kayaks, and so I asked Santa Claus one year for a kayak, and looked under the Christmas tree, and there's a bowl of canvas and some wooden pieces, and an instruction manual about that long about how to build a wooden kayak with a canvas frame.
And you're 12 years old.
I was 12 years old, and my dad, it was a great father-son project. My dad helped me build it. In fact, he did most of the work. But then we had this cabin on a lake in central Pennsylvania, and I'd bang around, and a motorboat would come by, and this was exciting, you know. I don't know, maybe that's when I first surfed. But then at the end of the summer, there was an outlet on the dam that created this lake, and I talked my mother into letting me try it, and it was moving water. So also, from flat water to a moving experience is wonderful. It was exciting. The waves were maybe 6 inches high, and I promptly went to shore, and the branches hung out, knocked me in the kayak over, so I had my first swim when I was about 12, so that would have been about 1960, I think.
So, had you seen other people doing this? I'm of the generation that saw Deliverance and watched the '72 Olympics, and those were the things that inspired me. But had you seen film or people doing it on rivers nearby?
Not really, no. I mean, back then in the early '60s, it was kind of an esoteric sport, and it wasn't televised very much, and it's kind of lunatic fringe people that were doing it for sure.
Well, one of the common threads I always hear among people is there was this instant passion. There was something about being in moving water on a boat that just was compelling and drew us in, and it sounds like that was the case with you.
For sure. I mean, that got me excited. I was a Boy Scout at the time as well, and at the age of 13, I joined an Explorer Post whose spring activity was canoeing, whitewater canoeing.
And the leader of the Explorer Post was?
A guy named Dave Kurtz. He was just a wonderful, generous man that gave a lot of his time, and it was a very exciting post that we did, rock climbing, we did winter trips skiing, backcountry skiing, things like this, and we were pretty good at those things. We took care of ourselves, never got in trouble, but we got these aluminum canoes, drumming canoes, from a livery outfitter up on the Hudson River, and banged them out, and then we started running rivers, and that's class 2, 3 stuff, nothing really death-defying, but it was great fun, very exciting. That's where that passion you just mentioned got instilled in me, running those rivers then. And
David Kurtz is a pretty famous guy in Whitewater as well. I met him 10, 20 years later, still racing in C2 and C1 as I recall, and still active in the sport. Probably well past the 80s and even into the 90s and 2000s.
Yeah, it was his life passion to share his knowledge of paddling, and he coached a lot of young people out of the central Pennsylvania area. He and I raced together. We were national champions 3 times in the 60s, I think.
In C2?
C2 slalom, yeah.
Yeah, C2 slalom.
But the interesting thing about this Explorer Post is that we made the first fiberglass C1 in the United States. And a year later, we made the first fiberglass C2. everybody's paddling Grummins with these keels on them, and they were open boats and all that. And he was a chemist, and he knew how to work with resin and fiberglass, and bang, these kids are putting together.
So where did you get the molds, or did you create the molds?
Well, we decided to have a slalom race. So we were outside our church, our host church, and we were painting these pole broomsticks, green and white, and red and white, and black and white. And also this guy bicycles up, and we could barely understand him. And he was a Yugoslavian graduate student named Nantahala, who was, I think he placed second in the World Championships in 1961, or something like that. He and his brother were really very good. And so he went to the Loyalsock River where he had our first little race, and we were stunned at the strokes he knew. And he was in a aluminum canoe as well, but he's paddling solo, and he's like showed us what later became known as the Dufek turn, sort of a hanging draw stroke, and we were like, oh, look at that, this is really cool. And he designed it. He went back to Europe, designed this plug for C1, sent the lines for us, and we made it with a strip of balsa wood and things like that, and then we took Bondo for auto repair, and made a plug. And it wasn't a deck hull and a bottom hull, a deck section and a bottom hull, but it was a mono hull, one way down the middle.
Oh, wow.
And so it was perfectly symmetrical. There's no difference between the bow and the stern, or left or right. So we made all these halves, fiberglass them together, and we went to the Brandywine race in Wilmington, Delaware, that spring. And about 10 of us shared two or three canoes, and we took the first 10 places. Yeah, so it made all these adults pretty mad. They were still hanging around in aluminum canoes.
So the racing was really your roots, as I remember talking with you in the past. And you end up racing in Europe. So talk about the transition from the Explorer Post, which I know is a few years until you're racing in Europe.
No, I was still in the Explorers.
Oh, okay.
So Dave Kurtz, this clairvoyant leader in the sport, said, hey, the United States has never had a real formal team go to the World Championships. Let's do it in 1963.
And we're talking about the ICF World
International
Championships, which still occurs these days.
Right, yeah. The International Canoe Federation sponsored these races, and the European nations had been doing this quite a while, since World War II, pretty much. And so America was kind of new at the whole racing scene, and we were so naive. Kurt said, let's make a team. So the first 4 C1s were all Boy Scouts. The only C2 was my partner Hank Yeagley and I was 15, Hank was 16. We crated up the boats and shipped them by freighter across the ocean to Amsterdam, and then flew over on Icelandic Airways, a prop airplane. And then we got the boats and went down, and the Worlds that year was held on the Lisa River in Austria. And we looked at this thing, it was a Class 4 river. We were terrified to paddle it, much less race on it.
Something like a stout Ocoee River, or even tougher than that.
Yeah, it was very steep gradient, very continuous rapids. And so we had this canoe, and we just the first thing we did was just ran it. We didn't even try to make an eddy turn anywhere. Water's going over our heads. Oh gosh, this is way bigger than our Class 2 creeks in Pennsylvania. But we survived. I think we placed second to last in the slalom event, and we used the same boat for the Whitewater event, and we placed third from last because the other 2 boats didn't finish.
Right.
Yeah. But it was an eye-opener, but I really saw, and we also had some kayakers. There was 2 kayakers from New York and 2 from the West Coast. That's kind of how we cobbled the team together. And I think Barbara Wright was there in a kayak, the first female participant from the United States. So there were a lot of firsts in that 1963 World's Championships. But I saw these kayaks. I said, well, this is the way to go. 2-bladed paddle. You're not kneeling and working with a single blade paddle. So I traded a spray skirt and a wetsuit top to a Yugoslavian for a kayak, and I got a paddle and shipped it back on the freighter. And it was a left control paddle. I'm right-handed, but I didn't know the difference.
Right.
And so I learned to paddle left control. I thought, well, that's what kayakers do,
Well, and to this day you paddle left-hand control.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because I remember in about 1975, I asked if I could borrow a paddle from you at the outpost, and you said, "Well, you're not left-hand control, are you?" I said, "Nope." So,
yeah. So I was pretty naive. So I was the only kayaker in central Pennsylvania for a long time, so I had to teach myself how to roll, which is different than a canoe roll. But I had pictures from a magazine from Germany that I kind of figured it out and learned how to do like a screw roll. Yeah. So that, and then through the '60s, I continued to race both C2 with Kurtz and then K1 too. But I was always a slalom specialist. I never liked water.
And you went to the Worlds in '63, '65.
No, I didn't have. I had run out of money. I had to work in '65 to go to college. I went to start college in '65 the fall, but then I went '67, '69.
Okay.
And then I got drafted at that point.
And you did a tour in Vietnam.
Yeah, I did a combat tour, and like most veterans, I came back kind of screwed up. I was in graduate school, and I came down with malaria, and so I really went through this depression. So I thought, what makes me happy? Well, paddling whitewater makes me happy, and I went down to the Savage River that Labor Day, and there's a race there. So I borrowed a kayak and didn't do real well because I was still kind of sick from malaria and kind of weak. But I ran into Tom Wilson, who was an MIT student, and he had been on a former World Championships team, and he said that he and another guy had started a manufacturing business making kayaks to sell. Now you have to understand that prior to that, if you wanted a kayak, you had to make one out of fiberglass, and their molds being shared by different clubs, and so I said, sell kayaks? He said, yeah, we're looking for a salesman. And so I said, okay, let me go up to Boston and see what this is all about. And they were making, they had both Tony Creon and Klaus Lettmann designs too.
And so Lettmann was a German. Creon was...
He was also German too.
Also German.
Yeah.
And these were the prominent designers that pretty much designed every boat race in the '72 Olympics ultimately.
Yeah, they were the... And back then too, we were paddling slalom boats on rivers. We were using the same river. So you might race one weekend and go run a river the next weekend.
In the exact same boat.
Yeah, the exact same boat. So they're all, 13 feet 1 inch long for the kayaks. And yeah, so but to have the two key designs, and Creon and Lettmann both had touring kind of designs as well.
Right.
But nobody was really retailing kayaks then, and so I got a job as a salesman. And so I'd go around and go to an outdoor sports type store and try to convince the owners or the managers or the clerks how much fun whitewater kayaking was. And I basically taught kayaking as my sales strategy. And it was great. I had a company station wagon, a trailer load of kayaks, and I banged around all the East Coast mostly. I went to Denver. I sold a box load of kayaks there to a group that wanted to spread the gospel, and then flew out to California, talked to the owner of Sierra Designs to buy a railroad box car too. That was the most economical way to ship them. And this is the early '70s, so this is like '70, '71. And then Sam Galpin, who was a partner with Tom Wilson, had a falling out, and Tom decided to start another company in eastern Kentucky, and invited I and two other investors to do Phoenix products. And Tom was a brilliant at laminate technology and how to use these different kind of resins, and so we started up Phoenix in '72 or '73, I guess. Yeah, and so I'm jumping around here, but I wanted to go to the '72 Olympics, but I just hadn't got my health back, and it was not ready for it. And so anyway,
and you were busy with work.
Yeah,
spreading the gospel.
I was traveling all the time. I really couldn't train. And then I tried out for the '73 team, and I didn't make the team. It really bummed me out because I had been winning every race, but had a bad run in the
touches.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah,
touch some poles.
Yeah, and so I didn't make the '73 team. So I focused on the whole manufacturing side. And it was about then, because we were in Kentucky, I began a relationship with Nantahala Outdoor Center.
Right.
Forrest Holden, who was one of the founders, had a summer camp on the Chattahoochee River in Atlanta, and he'd heard about what I was doing, and I think I might have sold him the kayaks too, and he said, would you come down and help teach my kids how to kayak and teach my instructors how to teach kayak? And so I and Eric Evans, who was a famous racer at the time, went down to Atlanta, and I think John Burton might have been there as well.
Yeah.
And so we did this thing, and Horace says, well, we just bought this place called the Toten Cherry in western North Carolina. It's an old motel, and here's the key. Why don't you stay there while you're training? So this was, I think this was 73. I get the years all mixed up. So we went down there, motel room, nobody was there. The place was closed down, but there was electricity, water, so.
You're talking about the roots of Nantahala Outdoor Center.
Yes, yeah. Before it was the Nantahala Outdoor Center, it was called the Toten Cherry Motel, and there's a gas station that was closed down too. And so Payson Kennedy and Horace Holden and of course Aurelia Kennedy bought it and wanted to start running whitewater trips on the Nantahala River.
And you ultimately end up working at Nantahala Outdoor Center. So, but you're at Phoenix Products, and you're making kayaks and selling them.
Yeah, at that time I was the plant manager up there making. I was trying to teach these hillbillies how to make fiberglass kayaks. That's another whole long story. But I was the coach in the 1975 World Championships, and I was coaching the K1 women's slalom, the K1 men's slalom, and Lynn Ashton at the time was working as a guide at NOC, and so we kind of had a little spark going on at the time. So every weekend I'd drive down, and I really liked what NOC was doing, the energy there. Payson had me teach several instructor classes of how to teach kayaking at that time, and then then about sometime around 73, 74, the first plastic kayak came out. It was called a hollow form.
Right.
I don't know if you remember that or not.
I owned one. I owned a yellow one.
Oh, well, you had the second year. First year was only white. But anyway, so I went to my partner and said, we have to get rid of the fiberglass technology. This is the wave of the future. And I bought one and took a sledgehammer, could break it up. The outfitting was terrible, but I thought this is the way it's going to go. And my partners didn't want to go that route, and so I basically sold my investment stock back to them and started working for the Nantahala in 1975.
Yeah. Which I think is about the first time I met you, because you kept showing up at slalom races, and you were primarily working in instruction, teaching kayaking, as well as the Chattooga River guiding trips there, it seems like.
Yeah, Payson, my first job was the Chattooga manager, the outpost manager for the first 3 seasons. So that's what I did. But I still would go back to NOC and teach kayaking and canoeing. I also open canoeist too, and was teaching that. That was great fun, but because we were the Chattooga is a very dangerous river because of all the undercut rocks and the holes in the rocks, and when it comes up, a lot of those holes get pretty tough. And so early on, I started, and working with a lot of experienced guides there, started developing ideas about how to reduce the chance of people swimming, and if they did swim or raft flip, how to get them out of the water. And we really orchestrated, particularly in a section called the Five Falls, down at the lower end of Section 4, ways to try to run that section as safely as possible. And that involved safety kayaks, that involved throwing ropes and going one raft at a time. And pretty soon, the other 2 companies at the time, I encouraged them to emulate our ideas, so we're all, if we ever did have an accident or fatality, that we were all doing the same kind of trips, would be the same kind of standard of care, and reduce the chance of a liability lawsuit.
Well, and if the other companies would focus on safety, then there would be sharing of ideas across companies and more innovation.
Well, and at this time too, you mentioned the film Deliverance came out. What was that, 72, something like that?
Right.
And all of a sudden, everybody and his brother wanted to try whitewater canoeing with bows and arrows.
Right.
And we were renting canoes at that time on the Chattooga, and I'd have these drunks come in and say, we left our canoe up to wrap around a rock. And so my first experience of unpinning boats involved going and get these rental canoes, a big old blue hole plastic canoe, I remember those. And midnight, because I had the canoe rented for the next day, I had to retrieve it, take it back to the shop, bang it back out, and run it again.
Well, we're gonna get into safety, and
oh yeah,
Les, you're a great innovator in the realm of whitewater safety. But let's wrap up the slalom and racing aspect. While you worked at NOC, you continued to race K1 and C2, as I recall. And I'll just say that when I entered the sport, that was the early 70s. I started paddling in 72. And slalom racing was the pinnacle. It was the skills pinnacle of the sport. And the very best paddlers were all slalom racers. And there weren't many people that were just pure river runners. There were, but anybody that tried hard was slalom racing, it seemed like. And that was reflective in the early culture of Nantahala Outdoor Center. There were other racers that had come to work at NOC to continue their race careers, but also to...
Well, because you had consistent water, we had a training course there. But the other thing, too, is the early fiberglass boats would break very easily. So part of that process was running rivers because you didn't want to hit rocks. So it emulated the precision boating that was required with slalom racing, weaving in and out of gates, weaving in and out of rocks, and that was sort of the way you did it. Then plastic kayak came along, ruined it all for everybody.
Yeah. So you're just to put in perspective, your tenure at Nantahala Outdoor Center began in 75.
Full-time, yeah.
And full-time and extended to
1985.
So you were there for 10 years. Chattooga Outpost manager for the first 3 years, and then a VP level overseeing all rafting after that, as I recall.
At that time, NOC was exploding, and we were getting outposts in the Koei, the French Broad, and there was a management group realized we needed to have somebody doing oversight of all those operations. So I somehow got in, became the vice president of the corporation, focused on rafting in the summer and not the kayak and canoe instruction. But at that time, this is where I first started getting concerned about accident prevention in a higher degree, as well as rescue stuff. And it was motivated primarily by the death of one of our guides, Rick Bernard, on the Chattooga. And he basically was a safety boat, slid under an undercut, and got wrapped up in a log that was jammed in there. And even what I know today, I don't think we could have saved him, but it took several hours to retrieve his body. I wasn't there, but I talked to the guides that did work with it. And one of them was Slim Ray, who was a photographer at the time, and how hard it was and how they wished they had certain tools. They could, like that metal thing that climbers use, like a carabiner? Yeah, carabiner. And the very weekend that Rick drowned, I had been taking a rock rescue course. I happened to be a rock climber too, and so we were learning about these stoke slitters and how to move them up and down the slope out. This is the North Carolina School of Table Rock. And so this light bulb went off in my head saying, like, why aren't we being more aggressive about having better rescue ropes and pulleys and carabiners? And at one point they needed a knife because the rope got tangled up and they needed to cut it, and nobody had a knife on them. And back then nobody wore knives on their life jackets or had whistles or anything like that. And so I think the way I dealt with Rick's death, and I felt responsible because I was overseeing all this stuff, and a lot of the people at NOC as well, was let's think more aggressively about river safety and river rescue techniques. And so for the next couple of seasons, I started training raft guides and working with raft guides, and a lot of this energy and ideas came from other raft guides. And Dick Eustace, Robert Harkness, all of us were contributing ideas, John Burton, and let's try that. Well, if that doesn't work, why don't we try that? Then Mike Facesser with the Outward Bound School, who was a superlative climber, started creating some other climbing concepts, and this is where the Z-Rag got invented. And I don't want to go into details like that, but pretty soon we realized we had enough information that the public saw us out there throwing ropes and dangling from ropes over Nantahala Falls. They wanted to know what was going on, and so we started teaching courses to the public.
Well, and you taught a course to my company.
Yeah.
I was an outfitter on the Ocoee at that time,
That's right,
Sunburst,
yeah.
And you came, and I think it was 2 full days, and we went up on the Ocoee River and set up some of these systems and put them to use.
Yeah, it was kind of an exciting time then, because people realized that you could think ahead and try to say, okay, if we have a problem here, how are we going to deal with it? And then having the right tools, the right ropes with you, and pulleys and carabiners to unpin boats. And a lot of it was real practical stuff, wasn't necessarily for saving lives. But then that's when Slim Ray approached me, and he said, we have enough information, let's write a book.
So the book is out, you're sharing your knowledge broadly, and you continue to do that. Even to this day, you teach rescue seminars and whitewater safety seminars for outfitters and canoe clubs and so on.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I had a lot of missionary zeal. I wanted to save the world. And NOC had my blessings, and I would travel all over the United States, Canada. I went to, later on when I had my own business, I went to Norway, Japan, teaching river rescue. And at that time, there weren't that many people teaching it. But what happened with the book, advent of the book, other people got interested and started their own businesses teaching river rescue. And outfitters began teaching it as well, so it became a kind of commercial enterprise to go ahead and teach a weekend of river rescue to people.
And as you said earlier, you worked at Nantahala Outdoor Center till '85, and we're going to talk a little bit about your transition from that. But you continued to race for a while, and you in fact raced in the 1977 World Championships at Jonquière, Quebec.
No, that one was where was that one? It was back on the Lisa River in Austria.
Oh, in the Lisa, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
No, what happened is I coached in '75, and I hated coaching. I wanted to be out there in the water. And then about this time, the closed cockpit C2s were being designed, developed by Steve Chamberlain out of Philadelphia. And before that, the bow paddle was way up near the bow, and the stern paddle was way back there.
Yeah.
By moving the positions closer, you could get in and out of the gates quicker. And I thought,
right.
Okay, I've never been a world champion, and this is my one chance with this American technology, because we got over there. And
the Europeans didn't have it.
No, the Europeans didn't have it. This was a whole new thing, but I was convinced it was a better way to race. And I think...
And not only were the cockpits close together, but there was less volume at the bow and stern, so you could sneak the gates.
You could drop your stern and sneak out and sneak into a gate, and because they were usually, the end of the gates were about 6 inches off the water due to the fluctuation. And so, the whole thing was to get in and out of the gate as quickly as possible. And so an employee guide named Tom Boland and I teamed up, and I think with several people from NOC, John Burton and Gordon Grant raced in Whitewater there. Dave Dauphiné was an accountant. He and Dick Eustace tried out for the team, and I don't think they made the team, but we had a lot of racers coming out of the NOC area and this whole southeast area. So Tom and I didn't win though. I think we got 13th or something like that, but it was fun. But then I got into open canoe racing after that, of all things, with Bill Baxter, the guy that told the script. And Bill and I started marathon canoe racing, and I was always been a sprinter, a slalom. I wanted to get it over within 5 minutes, and marathon canoe racing, you're out there for hours, and this open canoeing was so much fun. But and we never won the nationals on that. We were second, third several times, but never did win. But that sort of wrapped up my competitive career.
There we go. And so while you were still at NOC in the early '80s, you developed a bit of a passion for multi-day river trips, and talk about South America.
Right. Well, one of the things NOC, we wanted to try to create work for these wonderful people that are involved with Nantahala Outdoor Center, and so I looked at the South America thing. Okay, they asked for summer. Their season starts in January, and I looked at Chile really hard, Argentina, and some other countries, Bolivia, Peru. But I was intrigued because Sobek had done the first ascent of the Biobío River in Chile, and so I'd heard about it, knew a little bit, and dragged out some National Geographic maps. And so in 1980, January of '80, three of us, all kayak instructors in NOC, Margaret Toms and John Weed and myself, went to Chile and made, I think, the second or maybe the third descent of the Biobío. And it was incredible. Beautiful smoking volcanoes, hot springs, incredible whitewater. It was like some really tough water, almost too tough for commercial use, but I thought this is the way to go. We can do this. And so we returned the following year with paddle rafts, and did okay, but the water was raging high. We had a really interesting experience doing CPR on one of the Sobek guests, and got him back, which kept that whole safety rescue thing going on. But I saw that Sobek and another company called Drift Adventures were using the big 18-foot oar rigs, mostly Avons, 10-foot oars. And I thought, that's the way to go. You know, you can carry food better, you can take passengers that aren't necessarily having to paddle. And I thought also we could ultimately run a better quality trip.
Well, and here we are, in the background here are 18-foot rafts with 10-foot oars. Yeah, that are a lot like those rafts that you
So the following year after that, it would have been like 82, I guess, or something like that. We flew down 3 oar rigs and a paddle raft, some kayaks, and we ran 4 commercial trips that year. And this is we're running 10-day trips through the Andes Mountains. It's incredible. Most of the rivers in Chile run due west into the Pacific, and this one river, the Biobío, went kind of diagonally to the northwest, and had some tremendous whitewater. And so that's why I kind of got involved with I don't know how to call it, oar rigs and Western style outfitting.
And that interest took you to Idaho.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Yeah, it did.
Where you live today.
Yeah. We live in central Idaho. Yeah. The funny thing, back in '85, I thought the southeast was getting too crowded. You know, like you go to the Koa, you just couldn't go out and surf any wave. And I wanted to go out west where there weren't as many people boating. But mostly, I really felt my wife Susan and I could start our own business. She had been running the Adventure Travel program for years at NOC. That was her job. And NOC was running trips all over the world. I mean, bicycling trips and hiking in Nepal and lots of river stuff. And she was really good at figuring out the reservations, the logistics, and shining up trip leaders to make sure they did a good job once they're at that location. And so she had all these skills. I knew how to row a raft and how to patch a raft. And so we had our babies in North Carolina, and then moved to McCall, Idaho in 1985 and started Canyons Incorporated, floating at first just the main Salmon River, going 6-day trips there. And after 3 years, we were able to get the finances to buy a Middle Fork business and do 6-day trips there. Or the guests could do a 12-day experience and do both rivers back to back.
Yeah, Middle Fork flowing into the main Salmon.
We call them the combo trips. Yeah. And we did that for 25 years, and it never made a lot of money, but we had a great time. We had really wonderful guides working with us. And all during that time, I continued to teach river rescue classes in Idaho and all over the world at that point. I also got involved with working as expert witness for lawsuits involving fatalities or serious injuries. And that was a different part of the whole safety aspect. But it was fun, and our kids, worked the business for a while, and it just was a great lifestyle for sure. But I've never lost my love for running rivers, and I keep saying, okay, one of these days I go back and grab my kayak and go back to the southeast and run all these rivers that we ran back then, and I can still get a kayak.
Yeah, well, let me know, because I'll go with you.
Yeah, sure.
So let's just reflecting overall, what about the way the whitewater sport has evolved? Canoes, kayaks, rafting, commercial rafting, safety. What are the reflections you would have about how it is now versus how it was back in the 60s?
I'm amazed. It's commonplace now, and this is for 60 years now. I'm 72. I've seen the sport develop. Okay, and I remember back in the 60s, there was a television show that had some kayaking, whatever, Wild World of Sports. They did a feature on what was his name? The doctor from Idaho,
Walt Blackadar.
And things like that. It's so exciting to see that development. But then I think the key was rafting. Okay, that people didn't have to have specialized skills or talents. That they could jump in a paddle raft or an oar rig for Western style
on a commercial trip.
On a commercial trip, and that outfitter provided those skills and the equipment necessary for them to enjoy whitewater. And the sport just grew incrementally. The advent of the plastic boat that made it, that you have a boat that will last forever, and you can sell it again or lend it to a friend. All that grew more and more, and specialized branches of the sport. The squirt boats. The play boats, little short play boats, and the freestyle development.
Creek boats,
and on and on. That those boats became safer, better plastics, better outfitting. I mean, that's bulkhead foot braces instead of pedal style foot braces. It just took time and development. Unfortunately, some people died in the process, but it makes me feel good to see how the sport has progressed and have been a part of it for all those years.
Well, the gifts you brought, Les, especially in the realm of safety, but instructing so many people, helping slalom racing evolve, introducing your own family, and being part of this broader circle of friends that you and I share is pretty awesome. So, well, thank you for this opportunity to do this. I mean, it's great for me. I've learned a lot and I've reflected a little bit on my own. But your contribution to the Southern Appalachian Paddle Sports Museum, this will go in the archives there, so people will watch this for years to come. And fiberglass kayaks and fold boats and wooden canvas will be super interesting to future generations.
Maybe or maybe not. It might put some people to sleep, for sure.
Well, great. Well, we'll wrap it up here. Thanks again so much.